My mother called Child Protective Services claiming I used drugs and beat my children. After 6 months of investigation proving my innocence, I discovered she wanted my ex-husband's child support payments for herself. The metallic sound of handcuffs that the officer held ready to use echoed through my house's hallway like a social death sentence, while I remained paralyzed at my own front door, still wearing the pink cotton pajamas I had received for Mother's Day the year before, trying to mentally process words that sounded like criminal accusations spoken in an incomprehensible foreign language. It was exactly 7:15 in the morning. A time that became permanently etched in my memory as the exact moment when my life as a dedicated mother and respected professional completely crumbled before my still sleepy eyes, instantly transformed into a Kafkaesque tragedy, where I had become simultaneously victim and accused of crimes I had never committed against the people I loved most in the entire universe. During the 37 years of my carefully constructed existence built upon foundations of responsible motherhood, honest work as a nurse in a public hospital, and mainly complete dedication to the welfare of my 6-year-old twin sons, I never imagined I could wake up on an ordinary morning and discover that someone had formally reported me to the competent authorities as a violent mother and user of illegal substances. The sensation was exactly like receiving a stab in the back while sleeping peacefully, waking up to a nightmare that would become my reality for the next 6 months of humiliating investigations, invasive psychological evaluations, and mainly the desperate struggle to prove my innocence against accusations that seemed to have emerged from nowhere, like a malevolent conspiracy against my maternal and professional reputation. Mrs. Laura Cristina Santos, my name is Marcia Oliveira. I'm a child protective counselor credentialed by the county, and we're here to execute a search and seizure warrant due to a formal complaint filed against you for child abuse and drug use in the presence of minors, said the black woman of approximately 50 years, meticulously consulting a folder full of stamped official documents that gleamed under the hallway's dim light while I tried to understand how my life had instantly transformed into a criminal investigation. Her voice had that bureaucratic coldness characteristic of public officials who had turned family destruction into automated professional routine, but her brown eyes showed a complex mixture of professional duty and genuine human concern for the children she was there to protect. There must be some terrible mistake, some absurd administrative confusion, because I have never used drugs in my entire life. I'm a registered nurse who has worked in a public hospital for 15 years. And mainly, I would never raise a finger against my children who are the reason for my existence. I managed to respond with a trembling voice that came from my throat constricted by growing anxiety. But the counselor simply handed me a yellowed copy of the official documents and explained with bureaucratic patience that they had legal authorization to examine my house, interview my children separately, and mainly collect physical evidence that could support or refute the serious accusations that had been formally registered against me by a source that remained legally protected by anonymity. The weight of the documents in my trembling hands seemed disproportionate to the cheap paper on which they were printed. There was my sentence of family destruction described in cold legal terms that transformed my dedicated motherhood into criminal suspicion, my loving home into a police investigation scene, and mainly my children into potential victims of a mother who supposedly represented danger to their physical and psychological development. When I finally managed to process the devastating content of those official documents, I discovered that the accusations were detailed and specific enough to have been invented by a stranger. They included information about intimate family routines, specific times of supposed episodes of violence, and mainly details about the internal structure of my house that only someone with regular access to our home could know with such disturbing precision. Counselor Marcia, I need to understand exactly who made these accusations against me, because the information contained in this complaint is too intimate to have come from neighbors or strangers. I insisted with a voice that alternated between desperation and growing indignation, but she explained patiently that the identity of complainants remained protected by legal confidentiality until the end of investigations to avoid retaliation or interference that could compromise fact-finding. The impossibility of directly confronting my accuser created a claustrophobic sensation of being attacked by invisible ghosts who knew my intimate life but remained hidden in the shadows of legal bureaucracy, using the child protection system as a weapon to destroy my family for reasons I still couldn't understand. The children woke up from the noise of tense voices in the hallway and appeared in the living room wearing their identical dinosaur pajamas, hair messy from sleep, eyes still sleepy, but clearly frightened by the presence of unknown uniformed adults in our house during the time we normally had breakfast together, watching cartoons on television. Miguel and Gabrielle, My precious twins, who had been born after years of frustrated pregnancy attempts, looked at me with that absolute trust that 6-year-old children naturally place in mothers, expecting me to explain why our peaceful morning had transformed into a formal meeting with serious people who spoke about subjects incomprehensible to innocent, childish minds. "Mommy, why are there so many people in our house? Did we do something wrong?" asked Miguel in his high little voice, instinctively holding his twin brother's hand in a touching demonstration of fraternal solidarity that made my heart break, imagining how this traumatic experience could permanently affect their perceptions about safety, trust in adults, and mainly about me as a protective maternal figure. Gabriel remained silent but carefully observed every movement of the official visitors with that intensity characteristic of children who prematurely develop skills for reading tense environments to emotionally protect themselves from situations they cannot completely understand. Counselor Marcia crouched down to the boy's height with professional gentleness developed through years dealing with children in complex family situations, and explained in language adapted for their ages that they would have a special conversation with a very nice psychologist who wanted to better understand what their life at home was like, if they felt safe and happy, and mainly if there was anything that worried or frightened them in their relationship with me or with other important people in their lives. "Boys, you haven't done anything wrong. You're special children, and we want to make sure you're being well cared for and protected as you deserve," she said with that maternal voice that officials specialized in child protection developed to reassure children during procedures that can be emotionally disturbing. Watching my children being led to separate interviews with a court psychologist who would evaluate whether I represented danger to their welfare was one of the most painful and humiliating experiences any mother can face. Seeing the people you love unconditionally being questioned by strangers about whether you treat them adequately, if you feed them appropriately, if you protect them sufficiently, if you love them genuinely. During the 2 hours the individual interviews lasted, I remained seated in my own living room under discreet supervision of the civil police officer, prohibited from interfering or even hearing the conversations that would determine whether I would continue being considered an adequate mother or if my children would be removed from my temporary or permanent custody. Dr. Silva, a 45-year-old court psychologist with short blonde hair and blue eyes that demonstrated professional experience combined with human sensitivity, emerged periodically from the room where she interviewed the children to make detailed notes in her official folder and exchange whispered words with Counselor Marcia about her preliminary observations. Her conversation fragments that I managed to capture inadvertently included phrases like typical behavior for the age, no apparent physical signs, and apparently healthy relationship with maternal figure. Comments that offered tenuous hope that the interviews were revealing the truth about our loving family instead of confirming the devastating accusations that someone had invented against me. When the interviews finally ended and the children returned to me visibly confused but not traumatized by the questions they had answered, Dr. Silva informed me that her preliminary evaluations had not identified immediate evidence of physical abuse, serious neglect, or psychological trauma that indicated imminent danger to the boy's welfare. "Mrs. Laura, based on the initial interviews with your children, I found no behavioral or emotional indicators that support the domestic violence accusations registered in the complaint," she explained with professional caution, carefully choosing her words to not compromise the investigative process. However, investigations will continue during the next months to minutely examine all aspects of the complaint, including allegations of substance use that require toxicological tests and specialized medical evaluations. The temporary relief I felt, knowing that my children would not be immediately removed from my custody, was quickly replaced by growing understanding that our family would face months of invasive scrutiny, repeated interviews, surprise home visits, and mainly the constant psychological pressure of living under official suspicion of crimes I had never committed. "Dr. Silva, I need you to understand that these accusations are completely false and that someone is using the child protection system to persecute me for reasons I haven't discovered yet," I declared with a firm voice despite the emotional hurricane devastating my interior, desperately hoping she could accelerate the investigation process, or at least provide guidance on how to definitively prove my innocence. During the days following that traumatic morning, that transformed our peaceful family routine into an endless series of bureaucratic appointments with social workers, court psychologists, and child protective services officials, I began conducting a desperate private investigation to discover who had made those devastating accusations against me, and mainly why someone would want to destroy my maternal reputation through such elaborate and convincing lies. The first clue emerged when Counselor Marcia casually mentioned during one of her regular home visits that the complaint had been made by phone by a woman who claimed to be a concerned close family member and who possessed detailed knowledge about our domestic routine that made her allegations particularly credible to the competent authorities. The universe of people who had sufficient access to my personal life to know intimate details about schedules, routines, and mainly about the internal structure of my house was extremely limited. It included only direct family members, some very close friends, and people who visited me regularly. I began systematically analyzing each important relationship in my life, looking for possible motives that could explain why someone would want to destroy me through false criminal accusations. But initially, nothing made sense because I had always maintained harmonious relationships based on mutual respect and mainly had never given reasons for anyone to consider me inadequate as a mother or as a person. The devastating revelation came 3 weeks later, during an apparently casual phone conversation with my older sister Fernanda, when she carelessly mentioned that our mother Helena had commented being worried about my financial situation after the divorce, and mainly about my ability to raise the children adequately without the presence of a stable paternal figure. "Laura, Mom said you've been very stressed lately and that maybe you needed help with the boys," Fernanda commented innocently, but her words awakened a terrible suspicion that began forming a frightening pattern in my mind when I remembered similar comments that Helena had recently made about my emotional instability and my supposed difficulty dealing with financial pressures. "Fernanda, I need to ask you something very serious, and I need you to be absolutely honest with me," I said with a voice that revealed the desperate urgency of my growing suspicions. "When you went through those problems with Child Protective Services 8 years ago, did you ever discover who had made the anonymous complaint against you?" The embarrassing and revealing silence that followed my question lasted long enough for me to clearly hear the beats of my own heart accelerating progressively, echoing in my ears like war drums announcing a devastating family discovery that was about to be confirmed. Fernanda took exactly 23 seconds to respond, time I counted mentally while processing the terrible possibility that our own mother was capable of systematically destroying her own daughters through false criminal complaints. When she finally broke the tense silence, her voice had a bitter and resigned tone I had never heard before in 2 decades of phone conversations between sisters. A vocal quality that instantly confirmed all my most terrible and unwanted suspicions about the true nature of the woman who had given birth to us. "Laura, it was our mother," said Fernanda with a bitterness that made my stomach contract violently, while I remained seated in Dr. Silva's waiting room, holding the cell phone with fingers that trembled uncontrollably. 8 years ago, when I went through all that hellish Child Protective Services investigation that almost made me lose custody of Sophia, I discovered through an employee who ended up becoming my friend that the anonymous complaint had come from a woman who identified herself as a concerned grandmother and provided intimate details about our family life that only Helena could know with such devastating precision. My sister's words echoed in my mind like explosions that systematically destroyed each happy memory I possessed about our childhood, each loving memory about the woman who supposedly had raised us with unconditional love, each fundamental belief about the sacred nature of family bonds that I had maintained during 37 years of naive existence. The revelation that Helena had used the child protection system as a weapon to destroy her own daughters in moments of family vulnerability hit me like a psychological avalanche that instantly buried any trace of trust I still maintained in the basic humanity of the closest people. During the following 15 minutes of our devastating phone conversation, Fernanda told me horrifying details about how Helena had meticulously orchestrated her destruction almost a decade ago, using intimate information collected during decades of maternal coexistence to build accusations of child neglect and emotional instability that almost resulted in Sophia's permanent removal from my sister's custody. She knew exactly which buttons to press, which vulnerabilities to exploit, which specific fears to awaken in Child Protective Services officials to make her lies convincing, Fernanda explained with a voice choked by tears of rage accumulated during years of forced silence. "But why did you never tell me about this? Why did you keep this terrible information secret for 8 entire years while I continued treating Helena as a loving mother and trusting her completely?" I asked with growing indignation, that mixed with the double betrayal of discovering that not only was my mother a family predator, but that my own sister had hidden this devastating truth for almost a decade. Fernanda sighed deeply before responding, and I could mentally visualize her tears falling as she processed painful memories she had tried to bury through years of intensive therapy and psychological reconstruction. "Laura, You have no idea of the psychological state I was in after discovering that my own mother had tried to destroy me. I spent 2 years in therapy trying to process this betrayal, and my psychologist advised me not to share this information with you because it could cause unnecessary psychological damage to our family if Helena never tried something similar again. During the following 30 minutes of our phone conversation that permanently altered my perception about the family reality I had lived for decades. Fernanda revealed systematic details about Helena's modus operandi that clearly demonstrated that our mother was a serial manipulator, specialized in using the emotional vulnerabilities of her own daughters as tools for psychological control and destruction when she couldn't impose her will through conventional methods. She did this to me right after my divorce. When I was emotionally fragile and financially unstable, exactly like she's doing with you now after your separation from Ricardo. Fernanda observed with frightening lucidity that revealed behavioral patterns I had been unable to identify alone. The chronology of Helena's attacks against her daughters followed a calculated pattern that demonstrated conscious premeditation instead of misdirected maternal impulses. She patiently waited for moments of maximum family vulnerability, divorces, professional changes, financial crises, health problems, to implement her systematic destruction campaigns disguised as genuine maternal concern for her grandchildren's welfare. Helena collected information during years of apparently normal coexistence, observing our routines, cataloging our fears, memorizing our weak points, and then used all this intimate knowledge to build false but convincing complaints that seemed to come from external sources concerned with real family situations, Fernanda explained, revealing a level of sophisticated psychological manipulation that transformed our biological mother into an extremely dangerous domestic predator. But what would be her motivation to destroy her own daughters this way? What kind of psychological or material benefit does she obtain causing so much suffering to people she supposedly loves? I questioned desperately, trying to find some rational explanation for behaviors that seemed to transcend any normal concept of human evil. Fernanda remained silent for almost a minute before responding with a disturbing theory she had developed through years of specialized therapy and deep reflection on distorted maternal psychology. Laura, I believe Helena suffers from some undiagnosed personality disorder that makes her feel sadistic pleasure in completely controlling other people's lives, especially when she manages to position herself as savior of the same people she secretly sabotages. Through our detailed conversation, I began understanding that Helena used a specific behavior pattern that psychologists specialized in family abuse identify as modified Munchausen syndrome by proxy. She deliberately created family crises in her daughters' lives, to then position herself as an indispensable maternal figure, offering emotional and financial support during periods of chaos she herself had secretly orchestrated. After Child Protective Services almost removed Sophia from my custody, Helena magically appeared offering financial help to hire lawyers, emotional support during hearings, and mainly presented herself as the only family person who really cared about our welfare. Fernanda remembered with renewed clarity about patterns that only made sense in retrospect. The discovery that Helena had systematically sabotaged her own daughters during moments of extreme vulnerability forced me to completely re-examine each family crisis we had faced during the last 2 decades, looking for signs of her malicious interference that I had mistakenly interpreted as bad luck or unfortunate coincidences. My divorce from Ricardo, which had seemed to emerge from nowhere after 6 years of apparently stable marriage, now seemed suspicious when I remembered how Helena had begun making subtle comments about fundamental incompatibilities between us months before the first marital problems arose inexplicably. She planted seeds of doubt about our relationships during apparently casual conversations, asked insinuating questions about our husband's fidelity, commented about worrying signs she supposedly had observed but that we had missed, Fernanda explained, describing psychological manipulation tactics I now clearly recognized in my own matrimonial experience. The mental process of re-examining entire decades of maternal relationship through the devastating lens of this new information about Helena's true nature was like discovering that my entire life had been an elaborate theatrical performance, where I was simultaneously involuntary actress and naive audience. Each loving maternal gesture I remembered could have been calculated to collect vulnerable information that would later be used against me. Each loving advice about relationships or career could have been sabotage disguised as maternal guidance. Each expression of concern about my welfare could have been recognition of vulnerabilities she was planning to exploit at the appropriate moment for maximum psychological impact. Fernanda, I need to know exactly how you discovered that Helena was responsible for the complaint against you, because I need the same evidence to prove she's doing this to me now, I said with desperate urgency. trying to transform anger into constructive action. My sister explained that the discovery had been accidental. A novice social worker who had initially processed her complaint had made a bureaucratic error years later, casually mentioning details about the concerned grandmother during a conversation that shouldn't have happened according to confidentiality protocols. The official said she was impressed at the time with the level of intimate knowledge the complainant demonstrated about family schedules, domestic routines, and mainly about specific marital conflicts that weren't public. Fernanda remembered, providing a model for investigating my own situation. Armed with this devastating information about Helena's criminal history against her own family, I immediately began a systematic investigation to collect evidence that could definitively connect my mother to the false complaints that had been registered against me at Child Protective Services. The first step was meticulously reviewing all official documents related to the investigative process, specifically looking for details in the original complaint that only Helena could know, with the specific precision that had been demonstrated. The complaint included information about specific conflicts between me and Ricardo that we had discussed only in Helena's presence during family dinners, details about the children's sleep routines that I had shared casually during phone conversations with my mother, and mainly allegations about my deteriorated emotional state that exactly mirrored the concerns Helena had recently expressed about my ability to deal with family pressures. The second phase of my investigation involved carefully examining the chronology of events that preceded the anonymous complaint, looking for Helena's behavioral patterns that indicated premeditated planning. During the 2 weeks before the Child Protective Services visit, Helena had shown uncommon interest in my domestic routine, asking specific questions about work schedules, children's activities, and mainly about my relationship with Ricardo that seemed casual at the time, but now revealed investigative intentions. She specifically asked about how I was dealing with divorce stress, if the children were showing signs of emotional impact, and mainly if I was considering seeking professional help to deal with family changes. I recalled with renewed clarity about conversations that now seemed like disguised interrogations. During my detailed analysis of Helena's behavioral patterns, I discovered that she had implemented a sophisticated psychological strategy to collect incriminating information through apparently casual conversations that functioned as reconnaissance sessions for her future false complaints. Her visits to my house had become more frequent in the weeks preceding the Child Protective Services investigation, always with plausible excuses about wanting to help with the children during this difficult period. But now I realized she was systematically observing and cataloging details about our family routine that would later be distorted into evidence of neglect or emotional instability. The most disturbing aspect of discovering Helena's predatory nature was understanding that she had used decades of apparently loving maternal relationship to build a detailed psychological profile of her daughters that included my deepest fears about motherhood, my insecurities about financial capacity after divorce, and mainly my points of emotional vulnerability that could be exploited for maximum psychological impact through carefully calibrated criminal accusations. She knew exactly which accusations would cause me the greatest suffering and how to formulate them convincingly because she had spent 37 years studying my personality, observing my reactions, and collecting information about my most intimate vulnerabilities. I realized with growing horror, Helena's specific motivation for destroying her daughters during moments of family transition became clearer as I analyzed the timing patterns of her psychological attacks. Both Fernanda's case 8 years ago and my current situation coincided precisely with periods when we were becoming financially independent and emotionally distant from direct maternal influence. Divorces that could result in favorable financial agreements, professional changes that would increase our economic independence, and mainly the development of autonomous family relationships that would reduce Helena's central role in our adult lives. Helena can't tolerate our independence because it diminishes her psychological control over our lives. So she systematically sabotages our moments of personal growth to force us back to a position of emotional and financial dependence, where she can maintain her role as an indispensable maternal figure. I concluded, after processing all the behavioral patterns we had identified during our family investigation, this understanding completely transformed my perception about the nature of our family relationship. Helena wasn't a loving mother concerned with our welfare, but a serial manipulator who used biological bonds as tools to maintain psychological control over her adult victims. During the 2 weeks following the devastating revelation about Helena's true nature, I plunged into intensive investigation to collect concrete evidence that could prove her responsibility for the false complaints against me, consulting lawyers specialized in family law and mainly seeking legal precedents about how to confront abusers who use child protection systems as weapons of family persecution. Attorney Mendez, a specialist in complex cases involving manipulation of judicial processes, explained that situations like mine were more common than I imagined, but extremely difficult to prove legally due to confidentiality protections surrounding anonymous complaints to Child Protective Services. Mrs. Laura, unfortunately, cases of family members making false complaints to cause suffering to relatives through the child protection system represent one of the most insidious forms of domestic abuse, precisely because they exploit institutions created to protect vulnerable children, explained Dr. Mendez during our first detailed legal consultation. The cruel irony is that people like your mother manage to pervert systems designed to save families, transforming them into weapons to destroy healthy family relationships through fabricated but convincing accusations. His words confirmed that my situation wasn't unique, but part of a larger pattern of family abuse that exploited vulnerabilities in the legal system to cause maximum psychological suffering to victims who trusted their aggressors. The process of building evidence against Helena proved simultaneously necessary and emotionally devastating, forcing me to systematically document decades of maternal manipulation that I had mistakenly interpreted as genuine love. During solitary nights of meticulous investigation, I reviewed personal diaries, accidentally recorded conversations, text messages, and mainly behavioral patterns that now made sense as part of a long-term psychological campaign to maintain control over my adult life through systematic sabotage disguised as maternal concern. The most convincing evidence emerged when I began examining the detailed chronology of communications between Helena and me during the month preceding the anonymous complaint to Child Protective Services. Her phone calls had dramatically increased in frequency, always with specific questions about aspects of my domestic life that later appeared in the official complaint with suspicious precision. She specifically asked about how Miguel and Gabriel were reacting to the divorce, if they showed signs of anxiety or behavioral changes, and mainly about my ability to maintain stable routines during a period of family transition. I documented, creating a clear temporal connection between her information gathering and the subsequent complaint content. The most disturbing discovery came when I gained access to phone records through a legal injunction obtained by Attorney Mendez, revealing that Helena had made a 43-minute call to the Child Protective Services number exactly on the day preceding the official visit to my house. The unusual duration of the call suggested a detailed conversation that went far beyond a simple complaint, indicating the level of elaboration necessary to transmit all the specific information that appeared in the official documentation against me. 43 minutes is enough time to provide an extremely detailed account about supposed family problems, including specific examples, event chronology, and mainly recommendations about which aspects of the investigation should receive priority attention, observed Dr. Mendez, establishing a strong circumstantial connection between Helena and the anonymous complaint. The final confrontation with Helena happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon, when I decided to present all the evidence I had collected during weeks of intensive investigation and give her an opportunity to confess her crimes before proceeding with formal legal action. I arrived at my mother's house accompanied by Fernanda, carrying a folder full of documents, phone records, and mainly a digital recording that I planned to use to capture any admission of guilt that could strengthen our legal case against her. The house where I had grown up, which had always represented safety and family love, now seemed like an informal courtroom where I was about to confront decades of systematic maternal manipulation. Helena received us in the living room with that falsely warm expression that I now recognized as a calculated mask to hide her true predatory intentions. What a wonderful surprise to have both my daughters visiting me together. I hope you're not here to discuss unnecessary family problems, she said, with a condescending tone that immediately reminded me of all the times she had used similar words to minimize legitimate concerns I expressed about her manipulative behavior. Her premature defensive attitude confirmed that she knew exactly why we were there, demonstrating guilty consciousness about the crimes she had committed against her own daughters. Helena, we're not going to call you mother anymore because true mothers protect their children instead of systematically sabotaging them. I began our confrontation with firmness that surprised even myself. We know you were responsible for the false complaints to Child Protective Services against me and against Fernanda. We have concrete evidence of your participation. And we came here to give you one last opportunity to voluntarily confess before facing complete legal consequences for the crimes you committed against your own family. My words instantly transformed the room's atmosphere, and Helena shifted from falsely welcoming hostess to defensive defendant confronted with evidence of her guilt. Helena's initial response followed the classic pattern of denial and victimization that I now recognized as her standard psychological manipulation tactics. Daughters, you've completely lost your minds if you believe I would be capable of doing something harmful against my own family. I'm a loving grandmother who has always genuinely cared about my grandchildren's welfare and about your abilities as mothers," she exclaimed with theatrical indignation that couldn't mask the growing panic in her eyes when she realized her habitual manipulations weren't working as expected. Her dramatic performance only confirmed our assessment about her manipulative nature, because a genuinely innocent person would have responded with real confusion instead of calculated defensiveness. Fernanda and I didn't yield an inch to Helena's theatrical performance, maintaining our firm posture while she desperately tried to use all the emotional manipulation techniques she had perfected during decades of family control. "Helena, we have here the phone records that prove you called Child Protective Services for 43 minutes on the day before the investigation at Laura's house," said Fernanda with controlled voice, removing from the folder a copy of official documents obtained through judicial injunction. "We also have statements from officials confirming that the complainant identified herself as a concerned grandmother and provided intimate details about our family lives that only you could know with such devastating precision." The concrete evidence instantly transformed the room's atmosphere, and Helena shifted from defensive indignation to calculated silence, clearly evaluating her limited options facing irrefutable proof of her guilt. During the following 15 minutes of intense confrontation, we systematically presented each piece of evidence we had collected during weeks of meticulous investigation, including temporal patterns between her visits to our houses and subsequent complaints. Specific details that appeared in official accusations that exactly coincided with information we had shared with her during private conversations, and mainly the revealing chronology that demonstrated how she strategically waited for moments of maximum family vulnerability to implement her destructive psychological attacks. "Mother, you collected information for years like a domestic spy, cataloging our weaknesses, observing our fears, and mainly waiting for the perfect moment to use all this intimate knowledge against us when we decided to seek emotional and financial independence," I accused with a coldness in my voice that surprised even myself. Helena remained silent during our evidence presentation, but her body language clearly revealed that she was recognizing the truthfulness of accusations even without verbally confessing. Her hands trembled slightly while holding the coffee cup she had prepared before our arrival. Her penetrating blue eyes constantly diverted from our direct gaze, and mainly her breathing had become faster and more superficial. Unmistakable physical signs of extreme stress that confirmed our certainty about her guilt. "You don't understand the complexity of the family situation we faced," she finally murmured with hesitant voice, attempting one last victimization strategy. "Sometimes mothers need to make difficult decisions to protect their children from self-destructive choices, even when these decisions are misunderstood or misinterpreted by the very people we're trying to help." Helena's audacity in trying to position herself as a protective mother who had committed harmful acts for our own good left me simultaneously furious and impressed with her ability to distort realities through elaborate emotional narratives. "Helena, using the child protection system to attack your own daughters isn't maternal protection. It's systematic family abuse disguised as concern," I responded with growing indignation. "You weren't protecting us from anything. You were consciously sabotaging us to maintain psychological control over our adult lives, forcing us back to positions of emotional dependence where you could continue being a central figure in our existences." My words seemed to hit a sensitive nerve, because Helena finally abandoned the pose of misunderstood mother and revealed more sinister aspects of her manipulative personality. "Perhaps you're right about some details, but you never understand that everything I did was motivated by genuine love and real concern for my grandchildren's welfare," Helena partially admitted, revealing for the first time a fragmentary confession of her participation in crimes committed against us. "If I called competent authorities expressing concerns about family situations I observed, it was because I genuinely believed that Miguel, Gabriel, and Sophia could be being exposed to unstable domestic environments due to emotional pressures you were facing during your respective divorces." Her carefully calibrated confession attempted to minimize the gravity of her actions through sentimental justifications, but at the same time constituted legal admission that she had actually made the false complaints that had almost destroyed our families. Fernanda and I exchanged meaningful glances when we realized Helena had finally confessed her guilt, even while trying to justify her crimes through supposedly noble motivations. "Helena, what you just admitted formally constitutes abuse of the child protection system, falsification of family emergencies, and mainly use of government institutions as personal weapons to persecute members of your own family, declared Fernanda with legal authority. Regardless of your alleged motivations, the crimes you committed against us have serious legal consequences that can include years in prison for false reporting, aggravated defamation, and obstruction of justice. The mention of concrete criminal consequences instantly transformed Helena's expression from defensive to genuinely terrified, as if she had never seriously considered that her actions could result in severe legal punishments. During the following 20 minutes, Helena desperately tried to negotiate some kind of informal agreement that could avoid formal legal consequences, alternating between dramatic emotional appeals about our shared family history and more subtle attempts at sentimental blackmail based on her advanced age and supposed health fragility. Dear daughters, do you really want to be responsible for sending your own elderly mother to prison for family misunderstandings that could be resolved through honest conversations and Christian forgiveness? She asked with tears that seemed simultaneously genuine and performative. Remember all the sacrifices I made during decades raising you alone after your fathers abandoned us, all the nights I spent awake caring for you during illnesses, all the maternal love I dedicated to your formation as dignified and responsible people. Helena's strategy of using our family history as a shield against legal accountability only confirmed our assessment about her fundamentally manipulative nature. Mother, decades of apparently normal motherhood don't create credits that can be used to cancel serious crimes committed against adult daughters. I responded with firmness that surprised even myself. True maternal love would never result in attempts to destroy the emotional and financial stability of one's own children through false criminal complaints. Fernanda vigorously nodded with my statement, demonstrating that we had both reached the same conclusion about the impossibility of family reconciliation given the gravity of crimes committed by Helena against us. The conversation gradually revealed that Helena had developed a sophisticated behavioral pattern to maintain psychological control over our extended family through systematic manipulation of information and interpersonal relationships. During decades, she had positioned herself as the central source of communication between distant relatives, controlling which information was shared with whom, creating alliances and conflicts according to her personal interests, and mainly using her status as family matriarch to influence important decisions about marriages, careers, finances, and family relationships. Helena isn't just a mother who made mistakes out of love, but a serial manipulator who used our entire family as a laboratory for her psychological control experiments. I observed with renewed clarity about patterns that now made sense in retrospect. During our intensive family investigation, we discovered that Helena had secretly interfered in multiple aspects of our adult lives far beyond the Child Protective Service's complaints, including attempts to sabotage romantic relationships she considered threats to her maternal control, manipulation of professional opportunities through destructive comments to employers or clients, and mainly systematic disinformation campaigns among relatives to create family divisions that benefited her psychologically. She called my in-laws inventing stories about problems in my marriage, made subtle comments to my work colleagues about my emotional instability during social gatherings, and mainly spread distorted gossip among relatives to create family dramas that she then offered to resolve, Fernanda revealed, describing a pattern of malicious interference I also recognized in my own experience. The most disturbing discovery of our investigation was understanding that Helena had used her granddaughters as unconscious tools to collect incriminating information about our private family lives, asking apparently casual questions to innocent children about domestic routines, conflicts between parents, financial situations, and mainly about any signs of problems that could later be distorted into evidence of parental negligence. She asked Sophia about how I was feeling after the divorce, if I cried a lot, if I was eating adequately, if the house was always clean and organized. Fernanda remembered with growing horror. The children answered honestly, thinking they were just talking with their loving grandmother, not knowing she was collecting ammunition to use against us in future family sabotage campaigns. The most sinister aspect of discovering Helena's methods was realizing that she had developed close relationships with neighbors, teachers, and other adults involved in our local communities specifically to create an information network that allowed her to monitor our activities even when we weren't in direct contact with her. She volunteered to help at school events, participated in parent meetings, and mainly cultivated friendships with people who had regular access to our private lives. I realized when analyzing how she had obtained such detailed information about aspects of my routine that I had never shared directly with her. This discovery transformed our perception of Helena from manipulative mother to domestic predator operating a true family espionage network. Confronted with irrefutable evidence of her crimes and systematic manipulation methods, Helena finally abandoned her poses as misunderstood victim and revealed more authentic aspects of her personality that confirmed our assessment about her fundamentally toxic nature. Perhaps you're right about my methods being questionable, but you can never deny that I managed to keep our family together for decades when any other mother would have given up facing the difficulties we encountered, she said with a coldness that contrasted dramatically with her previous tears. If I used information and influence to guide your decisions in the direction I considered best for you, it was because I had enough life experience to recognize traps you were too young to identify alone. Her confession revealed a mentality of absolute control disguised as maternal wisdom. The final conversation with Helena lasted exactly 2 hours and 47 minutes, time I mentally timed because I wanted to precisely document our last interaction before proceeding with formal legal action against her. During this period, she went through multiple emotional phases that revealed different aspects of her manipulative personality. Indignant denial when initially confronted with evidence, desperate bargaining when she realized she couldn't deceive us, genuine anger when she understood she had lost control over us, and finally a calculated coldness when she recognized she would need to prepare legal defenses against criminal accusations we were about to register. You'll discover that destroying family over legal matters doesn't bring the satisfaction you imagine, she said as a final attempt to discourage us. When we left the house where we had grown up for the last time, carrying our folders full of evidence and recordings that documented decades of systematic family manipulation, I felt a complex mixture of deep sadness for the definitive end of our maternal relationship and immense relief for finally understanding the truth about the toxic nature of the woman who had given birth to us. The house that had always represented safety and family love now seemed like a crime scene, where decades of sophisticated psychological abuse had occurred under the guise of dedicated motherhood. We'll never set foot in this house again, I declared to Fernanda as we walked to our cars parked on the street where we had played during childhood. Helena stopped being our mother the moment she chose to consciously transform us into victims of her own family crimes. The 6 months following the devastating confrontation with Helena completely transformed our family structure, not just through definitive rupture with our biological mother, but mainly through building a new family reality based on transparency, mutual protection, and mainly iron determination to protect our children from toxic manipulation patterns we had unconsciously inherited during decades of coexistence with a domestic predator disguised as a loving matriarch. Fernanda and I developed a completely new family communication system, establishing emotional safety protocols for our children, implementing information verification methods that would prevent future disinformation campaigns, and mainly creating a defensive alliance that would make it impossible for Helena or any other family manipulator to use similar tactics against our new family structure reconstituted on foundations of radical honesty and unconditional protection. The legal process against Helena proved simultaneously vindicating and emotionally exhausting, lasting exactly 8 months of hearings, testimonies, evidence presentation, and mainly the surreal experience of testifying against the woman who had given birth to us in criminal court, where she faced formal accusations of false reporting, obstruction of justice, abuse of the child protection system, and crime of false communication of crime that could result in up to 4 years in prison if she were convicted on all charges. During this legally complex period, we discovered through specialized police investigations that Helena possessed an extensive history of similar behaviors she had managed to effectively hide for decades, including false complaints against neighbors who had become too close to our family, attempts at professional sabotage against work colleagues she considered threats to her social status, and mainly a documented pattern of manipulating local authorities through fabricated allegations about community emergencies that never actually existed. The most shocking discovery during criminal investigations against Helena came when police specialized in family crimes found evidence that she had maintained for decades, a detailed file about our family that included secret photographs taken during visits to our houses, recordings of phone conversations she had registered without our knowledge or consent, handwritten diaries containing psychological observations about our behaviors and vulnerabilities, and mainly an organized collection of personal documents she had copied or photographed during her apparently casual visits, creating a domestic espionage dossier that would be used to build future family sabotage campaigns whenever she considered it necessary to reestablish control over our independent lives. The file functioned as a manipulation laboratory, where she systematically studied her family victims to develop increasingly sophisticated strategies of psychological control disguised as genuine maternal concern. During the criminal trial that determined Helena's legal fate, We witnessed in court a final performance of her manipulative capacity when she tried to convince judges, prosecutors, and mainly the jury that her criminal actions had been motivated exclusively by misdirected maternal love and genuine concern for the welfare of grandchildren. She sincerely believed were being raised in inadequate family environments due to emotional instabilities of daughters who couldn't appropriately handle pressures of adult life. Her legal defense, coordinated by lawyers specialized in personality disorder cases, tried to establish that Helena suffered from undiagnosed psychiatric conditions that compromised her ability to distinguish between legitimate protection and destructive interference, arguing she should receive intensive psychological treatment instead of severe criminal punishment for actions that resulted from genuine mental illness rather than conscious malice. Helena's defense strategy based on mental illness failed to convince the jury because evidence presented by the district attorney clearly demonstrated that her family crimes followed patterns too elaborate to be explained by psychotic impulses or maternal delusions, revealing instead conscious premeditation, detailed strategic planning, and mainly sophisticated ability to hide her true intentions through elaborate performances of concerned motherhood that deceived even professionals trained in identifying abusive behaviors. The defendant demonstrated perfect capacity for discernment between right and wrong, as evidenced by her ability to systematically hide her crimes for decades. Her capacity to manipulate professional authorities, and mainly her competence to create convincing narratives that masked her true destructive motivations, declared the prosecutor specialized in family crimes during her devastating closing arguments. The jury's final verdict convicted Helena on all criminal charges, resulting in a sentence of 3.5 years effective prison plus 2 years supervised probation, in addition to permanent judicial order prohibiting any direct or indirect contact with us or our children, including prohibition of communication through third parties, presence at family events where we might be present, and mainly any attempt to collect information about our lives through social media, neighbors, or other intermediary sources. The sentence also included substantial financial compensation to cover costs of psychological therapy for us and our children, legal expenses accumulated during the criminal process, and mainly compensation for moral damages caused by years of systematic family manipulation that had profoundly affected our mental health, emotional stability, and ability to trust authentic family relationships. During months of intensive family therapy that followed Helena's conviction, Fernanda and I discovered there was much more psychological work necessary to completely recover from the devastating effects of decades of sophisticated maternal manipulation than we had initially imagined. Our therapist specialized in family trauma, Dr. Regina Santos, explained that victims of family psychological abuse face unique challenges because they need to completely rebuild their perceptions about reality, trust, interpersonal relationships, and mainly about their own judgment capacity that was systematically compromised through years of maternal gaslighting that taught them to doubt their own perceptions about obviously destructive family situations. You spent decades learning to accept abusive behaviors as manifestations of love, to interpret manipulation as care, and mainly to question your own mental sanity whenever you intuited something was fundamentally wrong in your family dynamics, she observed during one of our most revealing group sessions. The psychological healing process revealed that Helena had implanted in our minds during childhood and adolescence a series of destructive beliefs about our own maternal capacity that explained why her false criminal accusations had been so effective in awakening deep anxieties about parental adequacy. She spent decades planting seeds of doubt about your competencies as mothers, making subtle comments about your limitations, questioning your parental decisions, and mainly establishing herself as superior authority in family matters so you would develop psychological dependence on her approval and guidance, explained Dr. Regina. During therapy sessions that lasted more than a year, we learned specialized techniques to identify thought patterns that had been influenced by decades of maternal psychological conditioning, developed skills to trust our own perceptions about family situations, and mainly built new relationship evaluation systems based on observable behaviors instead of convincing emotional narratives. One of the most disturbing discoveries during our family therapy was understanding how Helena had used sophisticated psychological techniques to keep us emotionally dependent on her approval even during our adult life, creating vicious cycles where we constantly sought her validation for important decisions about career, relationships, finances, and mainly about our adequacy as mothers, establishing a pattern of emotional dependence that allowed her to legitimately interfere in intimate aspects of our lives through solicited advice that actually functioned as opportunities for disguised sabotage. Helena didn't need to force her entry into your lives because you were conditioned since childhood to actively seek her guidance and approval. Creating a system where she could exercise maximum control with minimum effort, observed our therapist during a particularly revealing session about family power dynamics. During the intensive psychological recovery period, Fernanda and I faced the complex challenge of explaining to our children why their grandmother had completely disappeared from their lives without unnecessarily traumatizing them with details about family crimes that would be incomprehensible and potentially harmful to childish minds still in development. Working with psychologists specialized in family communication, adapted for children, we developed carefully calibrated explanations that protected their innocence while providing sufficient information for them to understand that Helena was no longer present because she had made choices that hurt our family, and that our job now was to protect them and create a safe family environment based on honesty, mutual respect, and mainly unconditional love that would never be used as a tool of manipulation or psychological control. The children's reaction to Helena's permanent absence revealed disturbing aspects about how she had begun implementing psychological manipulation tactics even with small grandchildren, unconsciously preparing them to become future victims of her family control patterns. Miguel and Gabriel, my 6-year-old twins, initially demonstrated inexplicable relief when they learned they wouldn't see grandmother anymore, confessing during careful conversations with child psychologists that she frequently asked strange questions about our family life, asked them to keep secrets about conversations they had with her, and mainly made them feel uncomfortable through comments about how I was too sad or too worried to be an adequate mother. Sophia, Fernanda's daughter, revealed similar patterns of manipulative behavior, describing how Helena tried to create secret alliances with her against her mother through special gifts conditioned on secrecy about their private conversations. During the 2 years following the definitive end of our relationship with Helena, our reconstituted family developed completely new traditions based on radical transparency, honest communication, and mainly emotional protection systems that would prevent any person from using psychological manipulation tactics against our children in the future. We established family protocols where any adult who tried to create special secrets with our children would be immediately excluded from our coexistence, implemented regular family meetings where everyone could express concerns without fear of judgment or retaliation, and mainly taught our children appropriate techniques about how to identify attempts at emotional manipulation, and how to seek help when adults tried to make them feel uncomfortable or confused about healthy family relationships. The most challenging aspect of our family recovery was developing new relationships with extended relatives who had been influenced for decades by Helena's disinformation campaigns, many of whom initially refused to believe evidence about her criminal nature, due to years of psychological conditioning she had implemented to establish herself as trustworthy family matriarch, an authorized source of information about our family. Some uncles, cousins, and family friends demonstrated genuine incredulity when we presented legal evidence about Helena's crimes, arguing that our ingratitude and resentment were leading us to unjustly attack an elderly woman who had dedicated her life to her family's welfare. These relationships required careful reconstruction based on gradual establishment of trust through transparency about our experiences, patience with slow understanding processes, and mainly willingness to accept that some relatives would choose to maintain loyalty with Helena instead of recognizing evidence about her true nature. During our continuing investigation about Helena's methods for maintaining control over our extended family, we discovered she had created a complex network of alliances based on selectively shared information, strategic financial favoritism, and mainly manipulation of interpersonal conflicts that kept different family segments in states of emotional or material dependence that made questioning her maternal authority difficult. She offered financial help to relatives during economic crises, creating gratitude debts she later used as psychological leverage to influence important family decisions. Functioned as mediator in family disputes she herself had secretly instigated, and mainly positioned herself as sole repository of important family stories that other people didn't have access to, establishing herself as indispensable source of continuity and family identity that would be lost if her authority were questioned. The most revealing discovery about Helena's family control methods emerged when we found evidence that she had orchestrated for decades a series of family coincidences that were actually calculated interventions to demonstrate her indispensable importance during crisis moments she herself had created or secretly aggravated. Financial emergencies that were resolved through her mysterious generosity, family reconciliations that happened naturally, after conflicts she had fomented through distorted information, professional opportunities that appeared coincidentally after periods of economic difficulty she had exacerbated through subtle sabotage, and mainly health crises that were overcome through her intensive emotional support during vulnerability moments she had strategically identified and exploited to increase emotional dependence. 3 years after the beginning of our legal and psychological journey to free ourselves from Helena's destructive influence, our family had completely transformed into a structure based on authentic relationships, honest communication, unconditional mutual protection, and mainly a new definition of family love that completely excluded any form of manipulation, control, or psychological conditioning disguised as maternal care. My children had developed sophisticated emotional skills to identify manipulative behaviors, express themselves freely about their feelings without fear of judgment or retaliation, and mainly demonstrated a sense of emotional security I had never experienced during my own childhood under Helena's controlling influence. Fernanda and I became intimate confidants who shared absolutely everything about our lives, implemented information verification systems that would prevent future disinformation campaigns, and mainly developed a protective alliance that would make it impossible for any manipulator to use similar tactics against our new family structure. During final family therapy sessions, our psychologist observed that we had managed not only to recover from traumas caused by decades of maternal psychological abuse, but mainly had developed emotional protection systems and family relationships that were significantly healthier than most families who never experienced direct abuse, because our experience had forced us to consciously examine each aspect of our family dynamics, instead of accepting dysfunctional patterns as normal. You transformed a devastating traumatic experience into an opportunity to create family relationships based on conscious principles instead of unconscious inherited habits, she observed during our last group session. Our family had become an example of how it's possible to completely rebuild family relationships on foundations of honesty, mutual respect, and unconditional love that would never be used as a tool of manipulation or psychological control. The final epilogue of our family story came 5 years after our last conversation with Helena, when we received legal notification that she had died in prison due to health complications related to advanced age and stress from facing legal consequences for crimes she had committed against her own family for decades. News of her death awakened complex feelings that included relief that we wouldn't need to worry about future interference attempts, genuine sadness for the loss of the woman who could have been a loving mother if she had chosen different paths, and mainly deep gratitude for having discovered her true nature before she could cause irreversible damage to the next generations of our family. We didn't attend the funeral, but sent flowers with a card that simply said, "Rest in peace, Helena. We hope you found the tranquility you never managed to create for your family and life." Currently, 7 years after the beginning of this transformative journey that destroyed our original family, but allowed the construction of authentically loving family relationships, our children are growing up in an environment of absolute emotional security, where they know they are unconditionally loved and protected, where their voices are heard and respected, and mainly where they'll never need to question whether the love they receive is genuine or constitutes a disguised manipulation tool. Miguel and Gabriel, now 13 years old, have developed confident personalities and sophisticated emotional skills that prepare them to identify and resist future psychological manipulation attempts, while Sophia, Fernanda's daughter, has become an articulate teenager who functions as a model of emotional resilience for her cousins and friends facing similar dysfunctional family dynamics. Our family story transformed from a tragedy of maternal betrayal into an inspiring example of how it's possible to break generational cycles of psychological abuse, protect children from domestic predators disguised as loving family members, and mainly build family relationships based on solid foundations of honesty, mutual respect, authentic communication, and unconditional love that will never be used as a weapon of psychological control. The devastating discovery that our own mother was responsible for systematic attempts to destroy our families through false criminal complaints initially seemed to represent the end of any possibility of genuine family happiness, but actually revealed itself as a necessary catalyst to eliminate toxic influences that prevented the development of truly healthy family relationships based on authentic love instead of sophisticated manipulation disguised as maternal care. Did you enjoy Laura's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.